The broadcast of the regular meeting of the Charter Commission Redistricting Rules Work Group will now begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this virtual meeting of the Charter Commission's Redistricting Rules Work Group. This meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 due to the declared local health pandemic. The city will be recording and posting this meeting to the city's website and YouTube channel as a means of increasing public access and transparency. This meeting is public and subject to the Minnesota Open Meeting Law. For the record, my name is Matt Perry, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Charter Commission's Redistricting Rules Work Group. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so that we may verify the presence of quorum.
Commissioner Abbott.
Present.
Commissioner Ginder.
Present.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf.
Present.
Commission Chair Clegg.
Here.
Co-Chair Rubenstein.
Here.
And Co-Chair Perry.
Here.
There are 6 members present.
Let the record reflect we have quorum. We will now proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's legislative information management system, which is available at LIMS, that's lims.minneapolismn.gov. Commissioners, the agenda for today's meeting is before us. May I please have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved, Abbott.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll on the motion?
Commissioner Abbott.
Aye.
Commissioner Ginder.
Aye.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf.
Aye.
Commission Chair Clegg.
Aye.
Co-Chair Rubenstein.
Aye.
And Co-Chair Perry.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
And with that, the motion passes and the agenda is adopted. Let's move on to the chair's report. I just want to quickly say that we are going to cover this in our agenda items below, but the co-chairs of the redistricting advisory group selection work group and the rules work group met on April 7th. And we spent about an hour, a little bit more than an hour and a half working on updating the principles, and had one addition proposal that we'll talk about more for the rules. And so that's what we're looking at now, or we'll be looking at today for the updated and proposed changes to the principles. So that's all I have. Co-Chair Rubenstein, do you have anything you would like to add?
No, I think you covered it. Thank you.
Okay. Let's move on to agenda item 4.1, considering potential additions to the procedural rules of the redistricting process. Is there any discussion?
Commissioner Perry, I'd like to propose an additional procedural rule.
Please.
Okay. In the discussion with the advisory group selection work group last week, we talked about the fact that there had been at least one advisory group member 10 years ago who was absent from most of the meetings. And we thought that it would be a good idea to include in the rules a rule related to too many absences. The principles do say, as you will see, that attendance at the meetings is strongly advised. That's not exactly the words we use, but that's the idea. And so we thought we needed to add a rule that says that if someone is absent more than 3 times, he or she will automatically be removed from the advisory group. it applies only to the advisory group members, since members of the Charter Commission, who are also part of the redistricting group, can't be removed that easily. And so we were going to propose a rule, and I would make it Rule 6 in this group of procedural rules, because it fits in at that point on the presence of the advisory group. And the rule we talked about says, an advisory group member who fails to attend 3 or more meetings of the redistricting group shall be deemed to be automatically removed from the advisory group. That by itself, it was what we talked about, but it also occurred to us that it would be a little unfair to remove somebody for too many absences if they had a good reason for the absence, such as if they're in the hospital or some other reason like that. And so what we wanted to talk to you all about was whether we could add some kind of additional qualifier, such as without good cause, understanding that that's not exactly defined anywhere. Except perhaps if one looks at the law. Another possibility is to make it parallel to the Charter Commission and how we deem attendance as excused or non-attendance as excused or unexcused. And if we use that language, whether that will make it clearer. So that's the question we raise. So there are 2 questions really. One is, do we want to add this rule about automatic removal after 3 or more absences? And do we want to modify the rule for what I would call fairness?
Thank you, Commissioner Rubenstein. Chair Clegg.
Thank you. I support the change Commissioner Rubenstein is suggesting. And I would just say, insert the words 3 or more unexcused absences. And absences would be excused the same way they are at the Charter Commission.
Other thoughts?
Commissioner Abbott, I agree with Chair Clegg.
Okay. I also think this is a good modification that we have. I think it's important to have something in there, and I think this what Commissioner Rubenstein is proposing and Chair Clegg and Commissioner Abbott have agreed is a good idea. I also think is a good idea to have included so that we have some continuity between the commissioners and the members of the advisory group. So if there's no other commentary, I would.
Mr.
Yes,
Chair,
Mr. Shortskopf.
what I was thinking then is that we would renumber the rest of those numbers. And I support the amendment. I think it's a very good idea.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I was just going to add, if we haven't voted on this yet, but assuming that when we vote on it, it's accepted, we will circulate the redrafted rules, including the renumbering, after this meeting so that people can see it again.
Okay, that sounds good. So with that, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move the recommended change for number 6.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second Abbott.
Abbott seconds. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Commissioner Abbott,
Aye.
Commissioner Ginder,
Aye.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf,
Aye.
Commission Chair Clegg,
Aye.
Co-Chair Rubenstein,
Aye.
and Co-Chair Perry.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
And that motion passes, so we will update the rules appropriately. And as Commissioner Rubenstein, Co-Chair Rubenstein said, we'll circulate it to the members of not only the, I think we should not only circulate it with this body, but also with the full commission. So they can be prepared when we get to our May meeting, that they can see that change. So on to item 4.2, the agenda and the agenda considering revisions and recommendations to the
Mr.
guiding
Chair.
principle. Yes, sir.
Before we move to the second item, on number 13, we have the old census numbers in the rules I have anyway now. I
Oh,
assume that we're going to update those. Is that correct?
Ms. Bashoon, do you have something to offer?
Yeah, with number 13, I thought that number 13 could be combined with number 3, and you just update what the recommended principles, whatever title you use on that. I think 13 and 3 could be combined, so everything's in 3, because that lists the work of the redistricting group and all the parameters that they have to use as they're doing that work. And I think it would make more sense to combine it. And I do, just to let you know, I have some other thoughts that I'd like to bring up, but I'll just bring up this thought at this moment.
Okay, and the rules themselves?
Yes, on the procedural rules.
Okay. So Commissioner Schwarzkopf, is that sound like a good idea to you?
Sounds like a very good idea to combine it with number 3, I think, yes.
How do others feel? Any other thoughts on that? And we'll update the Chair Clegg, was that your dog?
The mail's here.
Okay, so we'll make that, is there a motion to make that change that Ms. Bashoon has offered? Mr. Ginder,
I'd so move.
is there a second?
Second.
I'll second Abbott.
Schwarzkopf.
Okay, there's I think Abbott seconded. And is there any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Commissioner Abbott,
Aye.
Commissioner Ginder,
Aye.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf,
Aye.
Commission Chair Clegg,
Aye.
Co-Chair Rubenstein,
Aye.
and Co-Chair Perry.
Aye,
There are 6 ayes.
and that motion passes, so we'll make that update as well. Ms. Bashoon?
Yes, the next issue would be number 8. Under number 8, that's really old language. It doesn't take into consideration the meetings that we're having remotely now. And I did bring this up to Casey, and Casey thought something more like voting as required by law, using some basic language like that. Or maybe we just don't need 8. Just it just needs to be changed, that's all.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
Sorry.
Ms.
Thank
Commissioner
you.
Rubenstein.
I think, Ms. Bashoon, you have the old copy of the rules. We did change that. And I'm sorry that this got mixed up.
Oh, I didn't think there was another copy. I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't think there was an update.
We had a meeting, I think, last summer, and that was one of the changes we made. We added a sentence that said, for every meeting held remotely by virtual means, however, all voting shall be determined by a roll call vote.
Okay, I don't have that, but that makes more sense, and I guess I could let Casey weigh in. That sounds like that's about right procedurally.
Yeah, it all sounds good to me. I mean, the alternative, as Carol was saying, is make it even simpler than that and just say voting will be conducted as required. Either way works fine.
So Ms. Weber, can you speak to maybe the confusion about which versions we have? Because
the version that I have is the version that I was sent by Chair Rubenstein. And I don't have a version in my emails with the update. So I'm not sure. I'm happy to redistribute though, if whenever you all have an opportunity to forward that to me.
I'll be happy to. I think I sent it twice, but I will send it again. Anyway, that's all I can say. This was not, I was concerned when I saw it this morning that this was the wrong version, but we can make sure that we have the right one. I wanted to say as to, again, that number 8, it's nice to simplify, but it's also to give notice to people what we're talking about. And so I'm not sure that we want to simplify it so much that too much is assumed.
yeah, I actually, this item, as it was updated last summer, whenever we last met, I think we had good language in there, and I would stick with that language. So I'm not supportive of reducing it to something simpler. And as Mr. Carl has said, either way works. I would err on the side of Commissioner Rubenstein's original language, and she made that change originally. Other thoughts?
Chair Perry?
Yes.
Chair Perry. I think this was discussed at a prior meeting, so maybe it's already been changed, but to get rid of the number 10, I don't think there's going to be an operations committee, and I'm assuming that other version got rid of that.
Yes, it did.
Okay. And then I didn't know if 11 needed any changes.
Since we're looking at an old version, I would rely, I don't have the latest in my computer.
Okay.
It was changed. It says now the redistricting group may use all appropriate means, including the Minneapolis website and other electronic media, to communicate with the public. And we added, and to provide access to the public remotely by appropriate virtual means in the pandemic environment.
Okay, and I was looking at probably something right before that. The numbers might have changed with that.
Oh, okay, sorry.
All meetings of the redistricting group, whether working meetings of citywide public hearings. Is there a provision similar to that?
We didn't change that.
The only thing I want to note under that 11 and also 14 is that the charter did change. Under the charter, we have to invite comments from neighborhood organizations that are recognized by the city council. That has to be done before the 2 hearings that we put out with the 7-day notice. So those are kind of my concerns with numbers 11 and 14. they need to reflect that new charter language.
Okay.
And also for 14, the same is similar with the park board. We have to, before the last two meetings with the 7-day notice, we have to let the park district know about the map, and then we actually have to, the charter commission has to consider those before having the last 2 hearings.
Is it the last 2 hearings or is it any public meetings?
Well, it's.
So if we do more than 2, I know we're obligated to do 2, a minimum
Should
2.
be just 4.
Well, technically we have to hold 4 hearings, and we have to hold at least 2 of those hearings after giving a 7-day notice and inviting comments from each neighborhood organization. And I think that's similar to what we have to do with the park board before holding the last 2 hearings. The park board is more specific. Before holding the last 2 hearings, we have to the commission has to notify the park board and then consider any recommendations by the board. And it's kind of, I would say that's, the commission is supposed to consider the recommendations potentially before the last 2 public hearings, but the charter is a little bit, it's not as clear as I would like it to be.
All right.
Ms. Bishun, that language I think is in the principles, and maybe we can put it in the rules as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that to your attention because
Yeah.
I'm not sure if the language is exactly accurate in especially number 14.
All right. So do you have suggested language, Ms. Bishun, that you can contribute?
I did not write anything out. Let me just see. I do have. I mean, I do have some language for toward the bottom of 14. If you put 14 up.
Can IT put 14 back up? Who's ever?
So under number 14 at the very last, yeah, it is the last sentence. It says before adoption of park and recreation districts. I would change that to say before holding the last 2 public hearings on a park district boundary plan. So that would put it in sync with the new charter language. So I would strike out before adoption of park and recreation districts. And I would put before holding the last 2 public hearings on a park district boundary plan.
And what about the wards?
Yeah, and I'm looking at that language. I guess what I would go to that sentence where it says once, I'm looking for it online. It says, once the proposed redistricting maps are completed, the Charter Commission will hold at least 2 citywide public hearings for the purpose of reviewing the proposed redistricting plans and securing the public's input. Maybe you add a sentence after that saying, before these 2 public hearings, there must be a 7-day notice of the hearings and neighborhood organizations must be invited to comment on the maps. Technically, it's neighborhood organizations recognized by the city council. So if you want, are you typing something out? I can repeat it. Is anybody typing something out otherwise?
I think I got it. Do you
Okay.
want to add recognized by the city council?
Yeah, that's what the charter says. So what would that link after you're done typing?
Say, add a sentence after securing the public's input that says, before these 2 public hearings, there must be a 7-day notice of the hearings, and neighborhood organizations recognized by the city council must be invited to comment on the maps.
Yes. So I would say that change, and then the other one on the last sentence related to the park board, and I think that might clarify that.
So that puts us in compliance with the charter.
Yes, it was changed a little bit, and that's why I wanted to bring it to your attention.
Okay. I see someone else has their hand up, but I can't tell who. Mr. Ginder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to make a suggestion. I'm not a fan of trying to make amendments on the fly during meetings, and especially in a situation where we don't have the apparently revised rules. So it's a little tough in the void to really vote on these things. And so I would not be adverse to having, a meeting later, our next meeting to go through this after everybody's had a chance to review the revised rules, much like we have the guiding principles. So I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with what's being proposed by Ms. Bashoon, but it's difficult to contextualize it in the absence of the actual revised rules.
Thank you, Commissioner Ginder. Yes, one of the things as a result of today's work is whether we approve the principles and the rules. And I would say, given what you just said, whether we recommend these for consideration by the full commission, which we have committed to do before the May meeting, suggests that we have to have another meeting, albeit maybe a short one, before the May meeting. And have these distributed out to the commission and to this work group.
Mr. Chair, it's Casey, and if I could just jump in, I did put into the chat, I'm going to call Commissioner Rubenstein's attention to the chat area. Clearly, she has a copy of updated rules that I just as staff don't have. So, Commissioner, if you can send those to me, I'll work with the team on this end, Ms. Norgard and Ms. Weber, and also, of course, our Assistant City Attorney, Carol Bashoon, to make sure that we've reviewed those. Also, any discussion today, and we can put that out in short order, maybe, today, tomorrow, so that the committee has those right away.
Sure.
I just sent them to you and Ms. Weber.
Oh, good. Thank you.
So, Commissioner Ginder, I just want some clarification. Are you saying that we shouldn't go ahead and vote on these without seeing those before, or those changes before the changes that we made from last summer? Or are you saying that yes, that we do so maybe provisionally, or what is your suggestion?
Mr. Chair, depending on how quickly we get the revised rules, my motion would be to postpone until the next called meeting so we can have time to review that. It may be possible that if we get these immediately, that the changes are small enough that we might feel comfortable going ahead yet today. So I'm willing to wait a little bit to see if the clerk does get the revised rules from Commissioner Rubenstein, and we can look at the amount of changes and to see if there's an issue there. But at this time, I'm not making a motion to postpone.
Okay, Chair Clegg.
Thank you. I agree we should defer. Maybe we should skip to the principles until the email with the updated rules is.
I don't know if anybody else is not hearing you, Chair Clegg. I'm not hearing you. Very faint.
Can you now? Huh.
Can't hear.
Very, very, very faint.
I'm going to log out and log back in.
Oh, there you go. I just heard you.
Huh. You can hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
I was going to suggest that we defer looking at these rules until later in the meeting, because otherwise we're arguing about changes that may have already been made. So let's do this at the conclusion of the meeting and go to the principles.
Yep, I agree. Let's do that. I think the last change that Ms. Bashoon suggested, though, was one that would have been applicable to make regardless, because they were not in our changes that we made last summer. So, but I think we should defer any additional changes to the end of the meeting, and hopefully people can take a glance through. So, Mr. Carl, are you emailing them out, or is somebody emailing them out to the committee?
I am going to not only email those, but my recommendation is that I can pull up my screen and in real time reflect the changes or corrections as we make them. So I'll be sending that out very shortly, and then I'll pull up my screen.
Okay, so with that, let's move on to, let's table any further discussion and move on to item 4.2 of the agenda, which is considering revisions and recommendations to the guiding principles of the redistricting process. Did people have a chance to see the redlined version that came out very last minute today? There they are.
Yes, this is Commissioner Ginder. I've had a chance to review those.
Okay. So what I'm going to suggest is that we go through, like we did for the rules, we go through these, and if anybody has any additional suggestions or comment, that we take them one at a time. And if not, we'll just move on rather than going into explaining and reading them. So We'll start out with guiding principles for the City of Minneapolis Redistricting Group. Any changes with Section A? All members of the, actually what happened with A and B is they just got swapped. Any issues with that? I see none or hear none. We deleted a section, as you can see, and inserted another, and this is in C. Any comment? Hearing none, let's move on to D.
Chair Perry,
Yes, Ms. Bashoon.
I did have some comments on B. I didn't know if you were looking at A or B at that time.
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't think there would be any comments because we just swapped them, but you have a comment on B?
Yeah, I mean, it's a minor change and you can consider it. Technically, the Minnesota legislature might not do the redistricting, and that's typical that the courts end up doing it. So I didn't know if you wanted to just update that to say after the Minnesota legislature or the court has completed the legislative reapportionment process. It's just a technical change that's actually more accurate. I just wanted to throw that out because we may have missed that last 10 years ago.
I very much agree.
Okay. Is anybody else have any other comment on that? So is there, I think we can, rather than doing a motion on each one of these, if it's something small like this, I think we can just do it, insert the language unless there's objection. Does anybody have any objection with proceeding in that matter rather than taking a roll call vote on each item? And I see there's someone else who has their hand up, but I can't see them.
Hand has been withdrawn, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Okay, so let's add.
The only thing I was going to say is what you just said, and that is if there are consensus items, we should just accumulate those and vote on them at the end.
Okay, so I think there's consensus on including or court. The words or court has completed its reapportionment process. So we're down to D.
Chair Perry?
Yes, Ms. Bashoon.
I do have some comments on number
C?
1.
Oh, on number 1 on D?
Yeah, D1. Technically, the city clerk has set out the timelines for redistricting, and I think some of those have been approved periodically. There have been different versions of that approved. So I don't know that number 1 is necessary. And then for number 2, that could become more generic, outline the legal requirements of redistricting. So that could cover number 1, which sets out the requirement for redistricting, and because I could outline the legal requirements of redistricting.
Anybody have any comment on that or any opposition? Okay, so we'll strike 1 as a consensus item and have outlined the legal requirements as for what now will become 1, D1. Okay, any other comments on section D or part D? Let's go to E. Any comments?
Chair Perry,
Yes.
this
Ms.
is just
Bashun.
my lack of knowledge. I don't know if the planning department is still involved in the redistricting process. I think maybe Casey would know that, but I just wanted to throw that out. And it also, we don't have a GIS department, we have an IT department.
Okay. Mr. Carl, can you speak to the planning department involvement?
The planning department, as I recall, was listed in there because 10 years ago, they were the group that led the city's census issues. And so the census data came through them to us. And so they had a very minimal involvement with our work at the beginning of the process of redistricting, in terms of transferring that data and helping us understand what the data was at the block level.
And that is a possibility this time around as well?
Could be, but not necessarily. The group that led the census results this time around was the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department. They'll be the group that receives the census data that's transferred to us. As this group is aware, we have a very robust team that will be helping us that represents multiple departments. It does include representation from NCR, from IT, and multiple departments. So if we feel it's necessary to spell that out in these principles, certainly we can get a list.
It seems like we would like to do that, have them listed out here. So why don't we, is that something that you have at hand quickly?
I can put that into the chat.
Okay. So one thing is that I think would be a consensus item is changing GIS to IT. Unless anybody objects, and we'll get the other departments. Sounds like NCR would also be a department that would be included in this list. Chair Clegg.
I was just thinking that instead of trying to nail down each and every department that is participating in the process, we could just say participating departments. Because this could morph over time and involve somebody who is not involved now, or somebody might drop off the list.
How do people feel about changing that to that language? Can you give me that language again? Participating departments?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I would have one comment on that. I would consider maybe necessary departments, because participating departments, again, may change over time. And so some language that would address, some of the departments we've named and other necessary departments along those lines. So that would be just a suggestion.
And I'm fine with that.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, I saw your hand up, Co-Chair Rubenstein. I'm sorry, I didn't get to it.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
My suggestion was going to be similar to Chair Clegg's, except I wonder if we could just add necessary departments such as, and list the departments that we know are involved. Again, just because this is also, it's partly principles and partly notice.
How do Commissioner Ginder and Chair Clegg, how do you feel about that? Since you guys have proposed some language changes.
I'm fine with Co-Chair Rubenstein's language.
So am I.
Okay. Anybody else have any comment on that change? And we have a list of departments that in the chat that have been listed, which from except I can't see all of them. that Mr. Carl has listed. So they would be the city attorney's office, the clerk's office, the neighborhood and community relations department, the information technology department, the coordinator's race and equity division, the city communications department, and the community planning and economic development department. So that would be the such as. Everyone okay with including those as such as? Sounds like I don't hear any objection. I should ask if there are objections. Okay. We'll list that as a consensus item. And move on to F. This was a change that just was updated based on co-chairs Rubenstein's research. We had an old reference to the charter in there. So I don't think there should be any issue there. Section G. Any objections or comments? On to section H.
Chair Perry.
Yes, Ms. Bashoon.
I just, at the very end of H, it says if a redistricting group member is unable to attend a meeting and has input into the meeting, they're asked to contact the redistricting project manager who shall submit the input on their behalf. I'm wondering if that is correct process that you want. And I'm wondering if that would be Nicole, if that's who we're talking about. I just want to make sure that that's understood, because that could be quite a bit of work. I don't know if you wanted to go to the chair of the Charter Commission, but I just wanted to make sure that you're looking at the current process.
Yes, so what we were thinking when we met and had this language was that Nicole would be the person that we had in mind for the redistricting project manager. And so it doesn't specify who it's going to, but it would be to Ms. Weber, and then I would assume she would distribute that to the redistricting group. Co-chair Rubenstein. Can you're on mute.
With due respect to Nicole, I did double check your title when I was going through these, and that I know that is the correct title. And I just wanted to add that it's only talking about advisory group member. It's a lot to ask in one way, but also it's only the advisory group members we're referring to here. And we're also trying to ensure that they attend all the meetings as they can, so that this, one hopes, will not come up that often.
This is Chair Perry. It does say, that sentence does say if a redistricting group member, so that could include, both
Right.
charter commissioners and the advisory group members. So if
Right.
you want to specify that, and I know we have a process in place typically where things get around to the charter commissioners, and I don't know if we will no longer use that, if we're going to use Nicole Weber instead of using Maddie to send things around, but just something to consider, because I just, I saw last time we had really good processes in place to collect a lot of the data, including setting up an email address where all comments would go to an email address, so we had it all conglomerated together. So I just want to make sure you have the right process in place so that things run smoothly.
I do stand corrected, sorry.
So I still, I think what we should ask, and Co-Chair Rubenstein, is your hand still up or is it down? Okay, somebody else's hand up?
Yep, that would be mine.
Yes, I was going to ask Ms. Weber, what are your thoughts on this since this directly affects you?
I'm happy to take on that responsibility if that makes sense to everyone. I'm expecting to take on those types of roles with this process. I do want to let you know that Grant Johnson, who is the main IT resource for the clerk's office, did just have a redistricting specific email address created. And as soon as that's up and running, which should be sometime today, that would be what we would use to collect those types of comments. And myself and Maddie will both have access to that email address. So I would also, I wouldn't want to speak for Maddie and Maddie's expectations of her responsibilities either. If it's something that we're splitting, I would want that to be something that was comfortable with Maddie as well. Basically, I'm happy to be the contact, whatever the decision, whichever decision is best here.
Does anybody else have any thoughts on it? I think thanks Ms. Weber for your input on that. I think I would leave it as one person and have it be Ms. Weber. Has anybody else got any thoughts on that? Any objection to that? Okay, let's continue on. Part I. Any objection? Part J.
Chair.
Ms. Pichun?
Yeah, Chair Perry, there's just an error in I. It just says all residents. So just get rid of that double.
Oh, it is in my version. Residence is struck through. The second residence is struck.
Oh, okay. Mine wasn't the one that was all without the strike throughs.
Okay. So the version I have for strike through that has the strike through is redlined, has that second one struck. So
okay.
And so Jay, any objections to Jay?
Chair Perry, when I read through this, the words experience such as but is not limited to, I didn't really understand what that meant. And then this is written at some point toward the end, it's written in to the individual. It says from your occupational perspective. So I think it's just worded a little awkwardly for my taste.
Thoughts from the group?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, yes, Commissioner Schwarzkopf.
I had the same problem when I read it. I put a question mark by it. I think I know what it's supposed to mean, but I'm not sure what it's supposed to mean. When it says experiences such as, but not limited to living in the city, well, they gotta live in the city in order to apply. They gotta be a city resident. And geographical representation must refer back to the experiences, but I don't know what kind of experience it is about living someplace. Anyway, it just doesn't make sense.
So I think what we were trying to do was give some examples of the diversity that we were seeking, not only being racial diversity, but diversity in thought and experience. And so we were trying to capture that. That's where the such as comes from. And you're correct, living in the city is probably something that can be struck, since you have to be living in the city to be on the advisory group and the redistricting group. But I think the others kind of capture that it's not just racial diversity that we're seeking. Commissioner Rubenstein.
Thank you. This change came from our meeting last week with the chairs, the co-chairs of the advisory group, work group. And I think it just got a little garbled when it got written out. And I think perhaps what was meant to say, it was also some of these other items reflect what was on at least last time, the application for becoming an advisory group member. So I would suggest that we say instead, this diversity includes racial diversity and diversity of experience, such as, and delete but not limited to, knowledge of the city rather than living in the city, geographical representation or experience from one's occupational perspective, and that might make it a little clearer.
I see some, thank you.
Much better. I understand that.
Okay. Somebody else's hands up, but I can't tell who.
This is Clegg, that's mine. I was just gonna, I like Commissioner Rubenstein's proposed language. I would just say after the word racial, I would add and ethnic.
Okay, that sounds like a good change to me too.
Commissioner Abbott here, I've got my hand up.
Yep.
I was going to make a suggestion that was almost identical to what Commissioner Rubenstein made, and I also agree with Barry's revision there. So it's as it is. It's kind of an awkward, kind of ungrammatical sentence, and I think those revisions fix that.
Okay. Any other thoughts or objections to the revisions that Clegg and Rubenstein are suggesting? Let's move on then, and leave that as a consensus item. K, part K. Chair Clegg.
Sorry, I neglected to take my hand out.
Okay, let's, any objection on part K? I see none. Part L. Part M. Part N is in Nancy. Part Q.
Did we
Okay.
skip from N to Q?
Again, I assume that we're going to re-letter these when they drop out like this.
Yes, we've got a little, we've got a, let's stick with the, so that I don't get totally confused here. Let's stick with the way they are lettered for now, but you're right, we lost a letter. Or two. So we will Q will become O, and we'll move on from and re-letter them as appropriate. But for the purposes of discussion, I'm going to keep using the lettering that we have right now. Part R.
Commissioner Perry, I have some changes.
Yep.
In the sentence that, I think it's the second sentence, it says neighborhoods delineated by the city's planning department. Technically, it's under the charter, that new language, it's neighborhood organizations recognized by the city council. And so I would, and they have to be solicited prior to these 2 public hearings. So my language for that, that sentence could read, neighborhood organizations recognized by the city council shall be solicited for input prior to these 2 public hearings.
And I'm sorry, which part is this in?
We're on R, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's it's the second sentence.
Okay. And your suggested language again is?
Neighborhood organizations recognized by the city council shall be solicited for input prior to these 2 public hearings.
Okay, any objections to Ms. Bashoon's language? I'm hearing none, so we'll consider that a consensus change. Part S. Part T.
Commissioner Perry,
Yes.
when you renumber these, because OP was missing, you would
Yep.
just have to change up, it says P through R in there, it mentions P through R, that would just have to be changed to be appropriate.
Yep. Okay, any other comments on this section? All right.
Mr. Chair?
Oh, yes, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
sorry. That's okay. I don't have a objection or comment, but I had a question for Ms. Bashoon.
Is this on T?
On T, also on S. We talk about a district court order and these provisions. This is what we did 10 years ago. But I just wondered what happens if there's an appeal and all that. That's not that, then it's, what do we do with that?
I think it depends what happens. I mean, if the district court just sends it back to us and we revise it and there's no appeal, then we revise it. If there's an appeal, then probably that we would be looking at whether or not pending the appeal, we should be doing the work in anticipation of the district court being order being upheld, or whether there would be some kind of a stay pending the appeal. So I think it depends on what happens procedurally.
Right, I understand it procedurally. I just wonder if the language is correct. That was my concern.
We could change it from a district court order to any appellate court order, and then that might cover it, because then, or district court or appellate court order, maybe we could do that, or just a plain old appropriate court order or valid court order. I mean, those are all options, I guess.
This is Clegg. I like valid court order.
How do people feel about valid court order? Any objection to that?
I'm generally in favor of valid court orders.
We often don't have much choice.
Good idea.
All right, so I think there's consensus on that change for both S and T. Let's move on to section 2, principles to follow by the Charter Commission in choosing members of the advisory group. Part A. Have we got that up? Okay, we got that up on the screen. Any objection? Any objection to part B? Any objection to part E?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Schwarzkopf.
can somebody tell me why we deleted C and D?
I'm looking at that right now. Yes, Commissioner Rubenstein.
Yeah, perhaps I can answer that. Because the both the job description and the application were already subject to public hearings 10 years ago when we first introduced them. The advisory group selection committee, I think with this, at the suggestion of Chair Clegg, as I recall, decided that it really wasn't necessary to have a public hearing and public input on something where there might be just some minor changes. And for that reason, we deleted it.
That's right.
Thank you, that's very good.
Thanks for jogging my memory, Co-Chair Rubenstein. Okay, where was I? We were doing E, there was no objection. So part F.
Chair Perry, I had some comments on part F.
Yes.
I just wanted to double check that what it states that there would be the applications would be reviewed in public. I just want to make sure that that is correct. So that's one comment. And the other comment is this kind of goes into detail as to what might be on the application for employment. I would just say that you should make sure that all of this is in the application. Like, for example, they have to be active residents. I was at the meeting when we talked about the application. There was we were talking about what that meant to be active, and it did say active citizens. And so I just wanted to make sure that this F is kind of in sync with what will be on the application for the advisory group members.
Yeah, and that meeting was on this past Friday, I think, which I was not able to attend. So I don't know, I haven't talked, and Commissioner Co-Chair Rubenstein, I don't know if you've talked to anybody from that group. I see a hand up.
Yes, it's Clegg.
Yes.
We kept to be on the redistricting group, you must be an eligible voter in the city. But we're not talking about the bare minimum qualification when we refer to active residents. We want somebody who is active in their city as a city resident. And we could say active citizens if we like that language better, because they do have to be registered voters, so that implies citizen.
That would, I guess, when we had that meeting, I guess I was steering people away from using the word citizen. Yes, you do have to be a voter, a registered, or not a registered voter, an eligible voter, which means you have to be a citizen of the United States. But typically the city doesn't use the term citizen unless it means like you have to be a citizen of the United States. So if you want to leave that, that's fine, but I just wanted to make sure that this was in sync with what's going to be on the application. That's what I was trying to get at.
Chair Clegg, you were at both meetings too. Do you, what are your thoughts about this being in sync with the application?
I think it's fine the way it is with active residents.
Okay.
That's not inconsistent with the eligibility requirement.
Okay, thank you. Somebody else have their hand up?
Chair, this is Commissioner Ginder.
Yes,
I
yes,
have
sir.
kind of a broader comment on number F, and possibly Ms. Bashun or Mr. Carl can correct me, but it talks about the process, including reviewing all applications and identifying persons eligible. And then it says the process, in the second sentence, the process will be done in public meetings. And to me, that includes the reviewing of all of the applications being done in public meetings. And generally, all the documents that are being reviewed during a public meeting are open to the public. And my concern is that on those applications that there will be non-public information that then we will have to go through and either strike out the non-public or some other issue. So my concern is that it probably should read more likely that the final selection will be done in public meetings. Something along those lines rather than the entire process takes place at a public hearing.
Mr. Carl, can you speak to that? And I see
I'm sorry,
some.
Mr. Chair, are you looking for me?
Yes.
What did I miss?
Mr. Ginder just asked a question about having all of the process be a public hearing for the application process or just the final selection process.
And for Mr. Carl's benefit, my concern is that if part of the process is reviewing all of the applications and all of the application review has to be done at a public meeting, and generally all the documents that the committee is looking at has to be made available to the public, we end up with applications that may have non-public information that the commission or the clerk's office will be then tasked with striking all the information. My suggestion might be is that only the actual selection, final selection, be done at a public meeting.
I tend to concur, and one of the things we talked about early on, I think with the advisory selection group work group, was the idea that the clerk's office would work with that group on preparing materials for the consideration of the appointment process, so that if there was the need to do redactions, we could prepare those and ensure that the only information presented was truly public data, to your point, Commissioner Ginder.
So do you, Commissioner Ginder, do you have a change in language that you'd like to propose?
I'm violating my earlier tenet of drafting on the fly. But something like the final selection will be done in a public meeting with the public being notified, and so on.
Mr. Chair? Go ahead.
Yes, Commissioner Rubenstein.
Oh, sorry, Ms. Bishop is probably going to add what I was going to say, so go ahead.
I was just going to say we could say that the recommendations of the committee will be made to the Charter Commission at a public hearing.
No, it's not.
The reason I'm saying that is I don't think advisory committees have to be, they're not, I don't think they're subject to the open meeting law. And so they could review the applications, discuss them, but then if they make a recommendation, of course, that must be made in public. And I don't know if Commissioner Ginder agrees with that, but that's might be a way to do it.
If the advisory group meetings are not necessarily public, then I'm fine with the proposed suggestion by Ms. Bishun.
There's another hand up that I can't tell.
This is Clegg.
Yes.
I was just
Please.
going to query again, why would the advisory group not be subject to the open meeting law? I mean, we are a co-committee equal to the advisory group, and we're subject to the open meeting law, and the advisory committee meetings have been held publicly, all of them. So what I was going to suggest, rather than try and get into that, is just say after the word the Charter Commission itself to review all applications, I would just insert a parenthetical that would say after redaction of non-public information.
Chair Perry, may I respond to that?
Sure. Yes.
I mean, technically, we could have a public hearing where the committee can discuss non-public data, and then we could have available to the public the redacted versions of the documents. They do not get the unredacted versions, but at the meeting they would be discussing some not public data. For example, people might be talking about, I know in the back, there might be some things that are not public. And I'm trying to think, I haven't looked at the application for a little bit, but there may be some things that are not public. They may talk about, like, how would you bring diversity? If they're discussing that, how would this person bring diversity? You know, that person may put down their race or ethnicity, which is not public. So those could be discussed technically in a meeting, but we could redact that out, and the committee members would need at least that type of information to make a decision.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. I had asked a similar question when we met last week, but and what I understood, and this is also from my recollection of what we did 10 years ago, it's not just the recommendations or the meeting where we make the final selection, but the interviews of the applicants were also public meetings. And that does raise the question that Ms. Bishun just raised, is what happens when you want to ask that question about diversity, for instance. But those meetings were indeed public. And I just don't want to leave out the question of the interviews, because that's prior to the final selection.
Ms. Bishun, can you respond to that, please?
Yeah, I mean, if we do have a public meeting, not public data can be discussed. So that is allowed under the open meeting law if we do have an open meeting, but we cannot provide copies of the applications that are unredacted. We would have to make sure that they're redacted, and only public information on the applications that you're discussing would be available. But you can discuss not public data if it's necessary for what you're doing. The only reason I brought up the issue of do we need to have a public hearing on these is You know, if an advisory group is not a quorum of the full charter commission, and if they're not making any decisions, they're just advising, technically there is some law stating that that doesn't have to be public. I understand that all of these committee meetings, like the one we're having now, is public, and that's the safest bet, but that's why I brought up the issue. But we could always just make sure that everything is redacted and we don't provide the paper copies with unredacted to the public. And maybe that's why I bring up this issue. Maybe we should leave it a little bit more generic and work out those issues. If we wanted to leave it more generic, we could leave out the sentence that says the process will be done in public meetings, with the public being notified of the time, date, and place of the public meetings. Or we could say we will be done in public meetings as appropriate.
How do people feel about will be done in public meetings as appropriate? I like that language better than striking the entire sentence out.
Me too.
I agree.
Okay. Since I'm not hearing any objection, Commissioner Rubenstein, did you?
I was just going to say I agree.
Okay. So we'll change that language as a consensus item for that sentence to be replaced per Ms. Bashoon's suggestion. Section 3, the role of the advisory group. We're almost done, folks, with this part of the agenda. There'll be, we got part A. Any objection? Part B.
Chair Perry, I do have a modification to that.
To part B?
Yes, it's not real clear, and it does talk about sitting together as one group, which to me it's like a visual thing of people sitting together. So I suggest that it be made a little bit more simple, and maybe we just say the redistricting group will propose to the Charter Commission the new Minneapolis Ward and Park Board districts.
How do people feel about that? Any objection to Ms. Bashoon's suggested change? Okay. Can you give me that language again, please?
Yes, the redistricting group will propose to the Charter Commission the new Minneapolis wards and park board districts.
Okay. Any objections? Hearing none, I will assume this is a consensus item. Any objection to or comments on C? How about D? E? And F? So we are done with the principles. I would entertain a motion to adopt the consensus items as we have discussed. And is there anybody who would like to make that motion?
So moved, Rubenstein.
Is there a second?
Second, Ginder.
Ginder. Okay, it's moved and second. Any discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Commissioner Abbott,
Aye.
Commissioner Ginder,
Aye.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf,
Aye.
Commission Chair Clegg,
Aye.
Commissioner Rubenstein,
Aye.
and Co-Chair Perry.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
And so that motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 5 is revisions of the former process narrative. And so Commissioner Rubenstein, through her research of all these documents, the tub of documents, I think, came up with this, or maybe it was in her own file system, this narrative. And so the question we have is, do we want to update and include this narrative as part of our work product, or is what the clerk's office is providing sufficient? Commissioner Rubenstein, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just add that this is more an informational item. I'm not sure it's anything we need to vote on. I don't remember how it came about. I suspect that Commissioner Schwarzkopf drafted it for us last time. And it's called Redistricting Timeline, but actually I changed the title because it really just talks about all the steps that we take in the redistricting process. So I think it's very useful for the Communications and Outreach Committee to use, and we may just want to pass it on to them, or whatever we want to do with it, we might want to look at it a little more to see if we want to change anything, but certainly not today since our meeting is coming to an end.
Yeah. Okay. So I think if people want to look that over, you can, and this is not something that we said we would have for the May meeting. But if we have a chance to meet again, we may want to consider updating this, unless the group feels that what Mr. Carl and his department is putting out is sufficient. So with that, I want to circle back to the rules. Have people had a chance to look at the rules that were sent out by Mr. Carl?
Can you see my screen? I've tried to share it.
Yes, amended June 25th, 2020. What does the group think of adopting these? And we have that item 6 in there, that where we would put 6. There are other changes that were made. Ms. Bashoon, did you have a chance to look through these?
No, I didn't. Were these, I just checked email. Where are these? I don't see a link in chat, and I didn't see an email. Am I missing it? I haven't had a chance to review these.
Okay, so what I would suggest then is that we need to give people an opportunity to review them, and we're going to have to meet again before the May meeting. I think it'll be a rather short meeting, since a lot of the stuff has already been covered in that May meeting of last year. Is there any objection to tabling this discussion? Do I need to have a motion to table it?
Mr. Chair, if you just say without objection and no one objects, we don't have to go through the painful roll call process.
Okay, so without objection, if there's no one objects, we'll table this until next meeting. And so I think we are at the end of our time and we are at the end of our agenda. So with that, I think we've concluded all of our business to come before today's Charter Commission's Redistricting Rule Group. And without objection, we stand adjourned. Thanks for everybody's time.
Thank you, Commissioner Perry, for leading this discussion.
You're welcome.